own land again. They own buildings and, like apartment residential buildings, apartments a thing, but no more land holdings. And it's called managed retreat. And it's just starting this year in Australia. So they're working with it and trying to, work out the kinks in the first year here. But as you can see, everything with the floods, the fires, the hurricanes, the winds, the crop losses, I mean, these operational loans that the farmers need, if they default on their loans this year, most farmers are out of business. And then there's going to be somebody there to swoop up their land. Obviously, it's not going to sit there idle. Somebody else, Megacorp, is going to come in and buy it. So we're precariously close to being completely 100% run by corporations on this planet. I mean, you really have, a few Rubik's Cube moves left, or a couple, maneuvers on the chessboard to escape out of this. So that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it at. It seems to be a concerted effort through all conglomerates to raise the rates past affordability, remove the insurability of areas by declaring them XYZ. And, sure, lo and hold, these corporations are going to own everything. You will own nothing. And I sure am not going to be happy. And I'm going to go kicking and screaming, and I'm going to try to deliver messaging so we can stop this before it even starts. And, Ryan was going to say, so he was talking about Europe. And Ryan, I know he wanted to chime in about Europe for a second. Here you go.
Well, before we get on to that, I can just add something also on top of what we were just saying. Something that came to mind when Ransom, you were just talking about the hurricane coming down over to Texas. Is we had a lot of people move to Texas and Florida over the last couple of years. I got friends down there in both Texas and Florida, and they're constantly talking about, and I mean, you see it here in Tennessee too. They're constantly talking about like the crazy influx of people and like, first responders having trouble with things, traffic having trouble with things. You saw Ron DeSantis like last year was having a big issue with the whole insurance scandal with all the Florida people. So if the hurricane does come, you'll have a lot of people from like, I don't know, like California, New York, Michigan, whatever, who've never been in a hurricane before. And so you have the people who have been in Texas or Florida like for years and years and been through all these hurricanes. Then you'll have the people that just showed up and bought the crappy house in the block with the bad foundations and have insurance issues there. And I could totally see that happening, adding, an extra layer on top of all that. And then going on to what David was just saying with the insurance, coming in, the wealthy corporate people coming to buy your farms and everything. The next big thing, and I was doing a bunch of research on this because it's kind of my industry, but, agriculture robots are really coming on pretty strong. I mean, John Deere is pretty much gobbling all them up, all these little startups. But they're getting to the point where they're just going to, farmers are going to start, foreclosing, and the corporations are going to buy them, and they got a whole new line of robots. And, like John Deere, like names all their equipment after like different types of animals and stuff. They're doing the same thing with the robots. And those robots, you don't even own them. Like they call it RAAS. It's robot as a service. It's like you will own nothing and be happy. You just like lease the robot for X amount of time, and that'll work on the place. So some corporation's just going to say like, hey, we own this land for this X amount of time, and we can get this amount of money by leasing these robots, and it just becomes another income stream. So what do you think, Ransom?
Absolutely. I've talked about that before, and I don't think a lot of people are seeing it coming, the progression of these products that are coming out. And the first generations, they may have some faults, but they're going to fix those. And I've seen the demonstrations, especially from John Deere. Not only do they have AI-controlled robots, they have remote robots. So they can use that service and have a person do the work remotely. And that, I mean, as far as farming goes, I've seen almost every kind of robot that does anything that the human can do on the farm. And it's really scary, which means that these conglomerate, mega corporations are going to rely on their AI workforce, which, that's bad for everybody, obviously, because then they'll have a complete monopoly on the food sources for the planet. And I think that's part of what's, I predicted this little skirmish over here between Russia and Ukraine was going to be the first robotic war that we were going to see that. And that's, just progressing. And it's in all fields, from sales There's going to be fake people. Matter of fact, I just had a water heater incident that flooded my house, and I had to get a new hot water heater. And they didn't have any that would fit the hole and in the local area, so I had to get one delivered. And of course, it was smashed when it got here, and so I had to go the different routes of customer service. And Home Depot's like, that's not our problem. That comes from an online distribution center, so we can't help you. You got to call the manufacturer. You call the manufacturer, and they're saying, well, we can give you your money back, and it'll take like half a month. Or we can deliver you a new one, which will take half a month. So you're stuck in there, and like you had everything planned for just in time, because that's what that is. Where I got the hot water delivered when I got home, and I was ready to put it in. So I managed to get it in there. They forced me to accept what I got and not complain about it, I guess. And all of the industries are turning that way. There is no customer service. So imagine what happens when you're relying on a payment for a crop on some land that you don't actually own anymore, and the robots are doing all of the work, and you're supposed to be keeping track of that, and you're still liable for it. Guess what? The robot's not going to be liable for it. What's funny is I just yesterday saw a video of an autonomous car in Phoenix, Arizona, driving, and it was going the wrong way because of it got confused about some construction, so it was going the wrong way into oncoming traffic. But it was smart enough to pull over for the police, and then it called like an automated system, and the cops literally dealing with customer service about a car with no driver in it. And what's funny is they were more polite to the robot and the customer service than they would be to any driver on the road that was going the wrong way and driving into head on. It was just funny that the whole world is kind of mesmerized by the changeover, but they don't see what's really coming. And what's coming is that pretty much the end of the workforce or independence and being able to do certain things, because you'll be outmatched and outmoneyed by these corporations that are buying up all the farmland. And then, like you said, John Deere's a good example, and there's other companies that are doing it too. They are building robots for every little niche that you could possibly have. So, there goes the days of a ranch or a farm with a bunch of hands that get paid and, rely on that and the whole local ecosystem. And I've been watching on the news, they're raiding all of the people really just pretty much coast to coast that does any kind of pickling or organic stuff that they're trying to sell, because, they don't have the permission from the government. It's not government inspected. And we know what such a good job they do. They allow even pesticides on organic foods. So like if you're not growing it yourself, you have no idea what kind of quality of food you're getting.
Yeah, that's a funny story about the cop car. I was cracking up there. The 2030 hell of the future is basically just going to be, any problem that you have, you call a call center and you end up in an automated infinite loop and you just can't get to anyone. It's not so bad with the American companies right now, but you deal with like any European company especially, and a lot of the ones that you think are American are actually European. And right now, or at least the last like 5 years or so, they've been outsourcing a lot of their customer service call centers over to like India or whatever. But I mean, very soon it's just going to be all automated, and there's not going to be, like even right now, like whenever I have to call a UPS or FedEx, like it's just, I forget it. It's like, I know I'm going to be on the phone for 45 minutes. I'm not going to talk to a real human, and it's just going to be terrible. And, when you see these big automated farms, like in the future, like if there's any issues there, it's just going to be farm robots all over the place. They might have some, like drones that scan the perimeter to see if there's any things going down, like if anyone's trespassing or whatnot. There might be a couple little security robots, but the actual humans that are in charge of stuff are just going to be sitting inside the house somewhere, just, sitting pretty, getting their carbon credits and living their best lives. David, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, Ransom, let me jump in. I was listening to y'all while I was getting a citronella candle, because we're sitting outside on the balcony out here, but there's a few mosquitoes. So, again, I'm not really into using insect sprays, and This is something to think about for everybody out there as a solution. As systems start to break down, something as simple as having, a lot of people put like DEET or bug spray on. Okay. A, it absorbs through the skin and it's not really good for you. But B, the supply chain's going down. We're going to have to come back to some old school stuff, like putting lemon balm out all across your balcony to keep the mosquitoes away, using citronella candles. It's got a nice glow. But we're going to have to go back to the old world ways. This is going to be such a dichotomy where, what Ryan and you were talking about with the runaway, with the AI and the robotics, but then we're going to have to start living like we were in the 1800s with there's going to be this duality of overlaying systems of survival, of living the way of life in the 1800s or pioneering lifestyle in the 1850s and 60s, overlaid with this incredibly high-tech advanced world that we're jumping into. And you can see how, we've seen a few movies through time where you have this ultra high tech and what would be sort of a Wild West pioneer environment. And another thing you mentioned, during these disasters, bugging out, if you were to need to leave, like how are you going to secure, if you have a pickup truck, you're going to have to think about, locked beds or some sort of, bed cover so people can't just see what you have in your vehicle when you're leaving. So if you really need to leave with a lot of your valuables, firearms, papers, foodstuffs, whatever it is, I mean, how are you going to be able to really disguise that or hide that or like lock it so nobody can just break a window and jump in and grab a bag that they see out of your back seat? There's a lot of things to think about for solutions moving forward through these conundrums as well, because I am just I'm thinking about, all right, the world had changed from, say, 1860. We came off the dual monetary standard of gold and silver, which were both used in society. Civil War reset everything, and then we came into what you consider the Nikola Tesla, these era of electric cars back in the 1880s, and the central banks started early 1900s. We come into World War I, incredibly low solar activity, and then suddenly it shifted again. And then we come into the Roaring 20s, the 30s collapse, and then we're into World War II. But that whole way of life changed also. You got to think, up until 1940, 1945, nobody had air conditioning. Nobody had televisions. That was a brand new era. And I remember my grandparents talking about this because we would watch, me and my sister, when we stayed out at their farm, because all the kids would go stay with the grandparents and, help repaint they had a big house, right? Like a big farmhouse. So we had to help, all the cousins would get out there and we'd all repaint their house. Not every summer, but a few summers. But we'd always at least go once a year and stay with them because it's kind of fun. Out there, they had pond and all kind of things kids love to do. We used to actually go outside and not playing video games back then, right? A different kind of world. But I remember my grandparents always saying, "Why do you always watch TV? You guys, this is a whole different." They couldn't understand the shift of the world either, just as much as we can't understand it now with the shift is occurring. The 1940s, the shift of that world of agrarian moving from the farms into the cities, getting this technology, this new technology called air conditioners, where everybody could get in their houses and not sit on the front porch and talk with their neighbors anymore. Because you go to the older neighborhoods, high crime areas now, but the older neighborhoods that have been abandoned from the 1930s and 40s, they all have those huge balconies where you could see down the entire street, everybody's balcony. They could have seen from stem to stern all the way down. Well, everybody used to sit out every night because they didn't have air con. And that was like part of the society at the time. Well, now we have air con. Imagine that change coming in where most people did not live in a city. 90% of the people lived in the countryside or farming areas or rural areas in the 1920s and 30s. And then this massive shift after World War II was just as much as of a shift we're seeing now. It moved from 90% of the people living in farms and rural areas into that they were being pushed into cities. The mechanization went from factory assembly lines after World War II. Again, the air conditioning was the thing that changed society most. The television also came into be, radio stations, and this was flipping people on their heads at that time. And then we come into the 60s flower power revolution. It is no different than what we're seeing today with all the ideologies being twisted around. Like that quick 20-year period of time from 45 to 65 is the same thing that we've pretty much experienced from like 2015 to 25, probably for the next 5 or 6 years, we'll experience it as well. As much as their lives changed after World War II, of all those things I just described, we are in it, but just in a different iteration of the exact same massive amount of change that flipped society on its head and reassembled it in a different way to prepare it for the next world. Because nobody knew, and I'll say one last thing, Ransom, is nobody had credit cards. Like, we had to learn what credit cards were. Nobody had debit cards. At the best, you travel with traveler's checks, right? But now we have digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, everything digitized, real world assets. They're trying to assign value, put it on the blockchain. They're going to run a bunch of smart contracts with it for ownership of that asset and assign actual value to it. It probably won't be in dollars. It'll probably be priced on Ethereum or Bitcoin equivalent to that, because there's going to be no way that fiat's going to be pegged to this new system. It's going to be something else, grams of gold perhaps, whatever that new peg is going to be. But see, we're going to have to learn all these new systems as much as our grandparents, if you're that old, can remember that switch of systems after World War II into this new world that we understand. But we just take it as like common, it's everyday life for us. But back then it was traumatic. I mean, absolutely terrorizing and traumatic for most of the population to shift, and that much technology and that much of a cultural shift at the same time. And I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah, that air conditioner's like life support nowadays. When I went down to Houston, it reminded me how humid it was there, and like I hated it because I live in the desert and it gets hot here, but it never gets moist where you have to deal with it. I couldn't imagine dealing with all the fungus and the bugs and all that. And you were talking about those mosquitoes, man. They were in swarms. Because that storm just went through the Houston area with all the flooding, and there was just massive amounts of mosquitoes everywhere. And we know that some people are tinkering with those. I don't know how far they've gotten with that, but we know that they've released some out there. So no telling in the next decade, what kind of sicknesses arise from just being outside. It seems like that's the whole direction of everything, is to keep people in these little cells that we call our homes. And ironic, you were talking about the radio and television, because this fire and the flooding knocked out the translators on top of the mountain that broadcast over the mountain into the valleys and give everyone their local news and all that. There's about like 20 channels or so that you could get through the airwaves. They weren't getting that because the translator was knocked out. So they're just getting nothing, no information. So you can imagine if you don't have something really stable like Starlink or something that has nothing to do with other networks, you would be out of information immediately, especially if the city gets theirs from a satellite as well. So if the power goes out, you don't have any internet and there's no television, even if you're running stuff. It's kind of bizarre that some of these old systems, there's a lot of people out there that still rely on that. And the air conditioners have become life support for many people that are middle-aged or older that have lived decades now inside those air conditioners. And when they turn off, unfortunately, a lot of people just die because they're not used to dealing with outside. That's something that, I've always found important right here in the desert. And, I go on these trips way out in the middle of nowhere with just a bottle of water. And I can do that only because I've done it since I was a kid, but lots of people just die from doing that. They're not used to it. They go out there, they evaporate all their water out of their body, and they weren't prepared for the environment change. And it was kind of like that in reverse when I went down there to Houston. But those people in Texas should have, an escape path if you live anywhere on the coast, and go bags and provisions that you would need while you're gone, because you might come back to not having any property at all. And, the same goes for houses on stilts as it does for your vehicle. So when I lived in Corpus Christi and a hurricane came through there, the only people that were really, driving out of town once the flooding started were people that had lifted trucks. And everybody laughs at that like it's silly. But, you're not the one that's stuck with your car failing because it's not tall enough to drive through the water. You see those people every time it floods. They get trapped in the roadways. People drowned every time. It's just crazy. Even here in the desert, where we don't even deal with tornadoes or hurricanes, we get flash floods, and there's always tragic deaths of people that try to drive through what they think is a little bit of water, and then the force of the water pushes them a little deeper, and then the next thing you know, they're gone. People fall in the arroyos around here, and they just disappeared forever. So it boggles me that, year after year, people are so unprepared, and it tells you how useless government really is, because they come to the rescue in the aftermath, and like police, no offense to police, but they're the after the fact reporters. They show up most of the time after whatever dirt happened is done, and they write it down. And it's kind of like the government as a whole. Sometimes they come to your rescue late, but nobody's going to save you but you. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, Ransom, you're giving me some PTSD talking about the desert there. I've done a lot of backpacking, and my one closest call was in Canyonlands in Utah. I did exactly what you just described, and I went out with a bottle of water without having any real canyon experience. Started first thing in the morning when it was nice and cool and beautiful outside. Started looking at a whole bunch of petroglyphs and walked for a few miles, just getting carried away looking at all the beautiful ancient petroglyphs and Squatter Man and all that stuff. And next thing you know, it's 110 degrees and it's high noon. And I had to do a few things that I seen on, Survivor Man to get out of that one. But going back into how the big changes in civilization, it was just making me think. I'm listening to an audiobook on the start of World War I right now called The Guns of August. Just all about like how crazy it was getting into that one. And it really was crazy because there's a lot of parallels to, our civilization right now. Everyone was saying, like, we're the most advanced civilization that's ever existed. Like, we haven't had a major war in 100 years. It'll never happen. The economies are totally linked. Like, we get all of our stuff, like, our raw materials from Germany. Like, we can never go to war with Germany. Like, that's crazy. The stock market would crash. And, see how that one played out. But they just had a whole bunch of like new technological advancements in a short amount of time, like leading up to that. So in the first couple of years of the war, you had cavalry charging out with lances right next to like tanks and people on motorcycles. You had people laying down like telephone cable and radio right next to carrier pigeons, and everyone was just using both. It was just like they were just trying to do whatever worked like at the time. And also, before I hand this back to David, just going over to you're mentioning the transmission towers or whatever with like radio. I think a lot of those have radio backups of like 3 days or so. So if the grid did go down, those things would keep going for like maybe like 3 days. A lot of the big ones, but after that, I mean, it's just a battery or a generator if someone can get it gasoline. But that's just about it. And I buy a lot of transformers. We're at those electrical transformers, and people always talk about like the grid going down. What's the biggest problem there? It's definitely transformers, which is just the things that change voltage from one voltage to another, so they can move power over long distances. Right. And with the way copper has gone up in the last couple of years, transformers are like I think they've gone up like 2.5 times like in price. It's honestly crazy. Like it hurts me to look at the price tag every single time nowadays. But just wanted to add that in.
What's the lead time on getting a transformer built from start to scratch?
Oh, the lead time? David was just asking on the lead time of a transformer. Right now it's pretty good. It's pretty quick. We have the copper now. It's just expensive. For a while it was pretty long, but right now we have it. And we have chips and stuff right now. The lead times have gotten pretty good actually. But it's just I mean, most people have it in stock because everyone kind of overcompensated from like COVID and stuff. So like lead times got so crazy during COVID that no one was able to get anything. And so like companies still have PTSD from that right now. So a lot of the big things like the chips, transformers and stuff, we have a lot of them now. They're just crazy expensive. And part of the reason they're so expensive is because people went through like inefficient supply chains in order to get some stock. Like people were valuing having stock more than keeping costs down. So everyone had a PTSD from not having stock, so they were just willing to like throw money out there until like just give me some product, I'll pay you whatever you want. So that's what caused a lot of the inflation that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, and Ryan and I we were talking earlier, having some grill out here, and he was telling me going on network versus what where you talked about archaic in-house system, non-connectivity, because I just mentioned one point that this pay-through model that we're moving over to. So, if any of you are watching the Adapt 2030 video channel videos on YouTube, Rumble, Brighteon, BitChute, one of the videos I was doing was the new cost play model is in the future, starting I think in 2025 in January, water companies will say we can deliver you water, but if you want to remove the forever chemicals, that'll be an additional charge. So we can give you water, or we can give you pure no chemical water. All right, so you're gonna have to pay for that. And then also with Ukraine coming out, there's $50 billion to rebuild their power infrastructure there. And they are not going, as far as I know, now it could change, but as far as the article, the way it was read, the way I interpreted it was, they were not going to completely reconstruct the entire grid as it was before this war. What they were going to have people do was put $4,000 to $5,000 of solar panel in each individual home as an out of cost per person, per household, or whatever it is for the house. And that was going to supplement the grid. They were going to rebuild it to a point, but at some off a main trunk line, you're on your own after that. So what they're forcing people to do is then not even rebuild the grid on a degraded grid or destroyed grid. You're totally responsible for your own power production now, and you're going to have to pay for it. And you're going to have to pay for your own clean water. So we're moving to this pay for play. And, a lot of times when we're talking about central bank digital currencies and compliance, comfort is a better term. If you don't comply, you don't get the comforts. Basically, just like they do in China, they cut you off. You can't take a train, you can't take a plane, you can't get a job, you can't rent a house if you have the wrong mentality in the society. It's comfort compliance. It's not really pain compliance, comfort compliance. So here we come again. Now, this entire shift that might be occurring or is occurring in Europe, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but if you could speak to that just for a second, and then I know Ransom's going to jump on this like a duck on a June bug, as they say down here in the Southeast.
Don't get me started on ducks here, David.
Geese too.
But I was just telling David earlier, I was at just a little event in my industry, and I was talking to someone who's he's from a German company, one of the main ones when it comes to like PLCs, programmable logic controllers. They're the little industrial computers that control all the industrial automation, production lines, manufacturing lines. And so he was telling me what they're doing over in Europe, and it's honestly it's pretty different from what we're doing in America right now. But and this includes the UK as well, even though they technically left Europe. But he says starting 2026, so 2 years from now, they got about a year and a half. Every new manufacturing line, every new assembly line, if it has robotics, if it has automation at all, like any logic or actuators, conveyors, whatever, it has to be networked.
Explain that to the
So that means that everything needs to be able to talk to everything else, because it's part of their big like industry 4.0 like Internet of Things. They want any tech operator or any like CEO or government regulator to be able to walk up into the plant and just poke their smartphone or their tablet at that assembly line and be able to gather data from it, basically, is what they want. And so by 2026, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we make at my job, it's honestly, it's dumb automation. Like it works good, it does its job, but like you can't like gather data off it like that. And that's how a lot of the assembly lines are and when it comes to the United States of America. But over in Europe, they by 2026, you just point your tablet at it, gathers data off it and everything. And so right now it's a big trend is they're scrambling in my industry to find people with skills in networking and cybersecurity, because there's a lot of executives that are terrified of cyber attacks on assembly manufacturing lines. So that's kind of what I was hearing, from a relatively very high up person in the industry. And they're worried about that right now.
So I'm wondering, Ransom, along with this, is this another thing to, if a certain company doesn't agree with the DEI or go along with the certain mandates that, society is supposed to abide by, then their manufacturing lines are shut down. And then because of the shutdown, then their share prices fall. And People no longer want to invest in the company, and this is a penalization for the companies who don't want to adhere to, because you see a lot of people pulling out of all these, green mandates, DEI, all these kind of things. There's a lot of companies pulling back right now. And was a Tractor Supply was just the latest DEI renege on that. They're like, hey, we're out of here. We're losing too much money. Good old boys don't want to, and all those people down to the South, they're stopping to buy from our company because they're just like, Northeast, cool, California, they had some increased sales, but the rest of the country, they were decreasing in sales because they're like, if you're going to play this game, they Bud Lighted them. So they're like, okay, sorry, we understand the conundrum we're in. Okay, we're not going to do that anymore, and we're going to just pull back from all these mandates and thing. Now, with what you just told me, they're not going to be able to, because if it's all automated network, then whatever you do, then they can pull the strings on you. Depends on the lawmakers. Damn. Ransom, they got us coming and going. How do you think you could work your way around this conundrum here? Work your way out of this. How do you work your way out of it as a company?
Yeah, that's a hard thing, because think about it. If you have a company and almost all your employees are robotic, nobody's going to be claiming they got offended because somebody called them the wrong word at the wrong time in the wrong way. And you wouldn't have to worry about that at all, because, that's the same reason that, I've talked about how I believe in the near future, almost all systems will be set up that way, including policing and all of these different things, because they're going to use this whole stretch of Marxism to say, look, we can eliminate all the cultural problems by replacing everybody in authoritative positions with a robotic AI that's not going to have these biases. And, if your factory's got all robots, you're not going to have to worry about if you hired the right percentage of the right people, or if people are going to get mad because there's too many men versus women, or any of that stuff. Because guess what? The robot's just going to work until it breaks, and then someone's going to come in and they're going to fix it. And then eventually it'll be a robot that comes in to fix the other robot. And then I don't know, I'm not saying that's exactly tomorrow, but I can see that within the next 20 years being a reality in most companies. Because if we've come up with this much ingenuity to create robots that take the human niche out of things, then obviously they're going to progress in a way that they get upgraded to fix themselves. And that's where it kind of gets into the dystopic future, because without hackers, and this is a good reason that these companies are worried about this, is because that will be the only revolutionary act in the future when everything is automated and controlled by AI, is people that know code, programming, robotics, and things to throw cogs in the wheel, to stop the machine from overtaking everything. That would be the only way out of that, if that system actually took a foothold and got in control. The other option is vote with your dollar and start, go back to old ways, and but that's just not cost effective for companies. So they're going to go with the cheapest futuristic way they can. And so far, just like with the minimum wage debacle, guess what happens? Robots come in and start flipping the burgers. Robots start taking the orders. Robots aren't going to get mad because you said something to them. And, if you didn't get pickles on your burger, you can talk to the robot about it because nobody else cares. That's just kind of the way things are going. And you can see that there's not much that we can do except for vote with our dollars. So if there's a place that hires real people and they make real hamburgers out of real meat, you might want to shop there, and you might want to keep going there. But they might shut those people down because some kind of health risk, or, perceived injustice, or, the number of ways is increasing on how they're destroying business, but not all business, not big business, not worldwide business. They want to destroy the local economies because they know that that's the way that you can control everything. If you can get the local economy under control, that means nobody's growing, nobody's selling, nobody's doing anything without your say so, then you have a control on it. So that's what we have to do, is take control of every aspect of this thing. You don't want to go shop at McDonald's because you didn't want a robot to make your meal with some beyond belief meat or something like that. I was watching this funny thing. I don't know if it's true, but I think one of the hot dog eating contest guys got banned because he let one of those vegetarian hot dog companies give them a sponsorship, and they just banned them out of it because, they're about the real hot dog flavor that only has 2% human DNA in it on average. I don't know if you've seen that, but our food's tainted. There's no other way to put it. And what's the quality? I already don't trust humans in the chain. And there might be something to be said about robotic automation in food. But then again, who's the human inspectors? Who's the people there to know, that something's not right before it gets out? I don't know how they're going to do all of that. Are they going to have robot testers to eat the food to know if it's good or not? And maybe just get rid of you, and then they won't have to produce so much food in the first place. And I think that's what the real plan is, and that's why we see Europe lining up to have a third world war. And, you see all of these attacks on the farmers. Why would they go after the food right before a major combat if they're worried about combat? Because they are. That's why they're bringing up conscription laws, if I could talk, in different countries, and everybody's getting ready to be able to ask for your 18 to 26-year-old fertile human beings to kind of sacrifice to the cause there. And then it'll be robots when there's no more kids to go. And that's what we're dealing with. And it's already like that on the battlefield now. And, you saw all of these protests. They're starting to destroy streets and stuff. And I think the reason that you're seeing that is because some old timers remember World War II, or at least remember their parents or grandparents telling them stuff. And there are ways to stop invading armies. And part of that is, unfortunately, to destroy your own infrastructure so that they can't use it against you. But, it's hard to say, who's going to be fighting any kind of resistance against tyranny when the entire system is now robotic. If you've seen a Predator drone, and this is old, early 90s technology, with a good FLIR camera, human beings are Christmas tree lights out there that can be seen easily. So the idea that, like we can't close our border or any of these other ideas are just kind of dumb, because we've been at a technologically advanced state for some time, and it's just only going to increase as we go along. And that unfortunately means that there's no need for 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah, well, one thing I think you're seeing out of the, Ukrainian war that was, that we learned this time around, there's a lot of drone combat. Shotguns work on flying drones about as good as they work on, ducks.
Right. Right. I've been seeing that too. It looks like the only way to fight against that.
Yeah, and then I saw also an article the other day that was like, Florida man arrested after shooting down like Walmart package delivery that flew over his house, and he thought it was spying on him. And I said, well, I wonder why we haven't seen any, like delivery drones around here. But, in Tennessee, I don't think they'd make it that far outside of maybe the very center of Nashville.
You guys spying on me?
Yeah, and I would suggest a 20 gauge on that bird shot, because if you're going to do 12 gauge slug or whatever, you're going to miss it. Go 20 gauge bird shot, and you should be able to get a wide splatter pattern. If you're going to use like a Mossberg or something like that, you should be able to get a wide splatter pattern. But, these are things to think about. I mean, either hunting or, what kind of world is it where we're having this conversation? I really wanted to say this with a straight thing. Like 20 years ago, if we were sitting around having this type of conversation, they would have actually asked us politely to go to an insane asylum, right? But we sit here today in real times and real issues talking about this. And before, you would have either been in science fiction or you dropped a couple tabs tonight, and these guys are off the rocker. And don't even listen to them, because they're so far out of bounds of even possibilities. It's so far off the radar of the possibility of that ever happening ever. That was so far. That was something you'd have to conceive as an idea, because it had never been thought about before. And here we sit today. Do you want to use 12 gauge or 20 gauge shot to take down the drone over your property? Like, really? This is the kind of thing we're having on 4th of July with the fireworks in the background? Are you kidding me?
Well, you could just microwave you some popcorn in the right direction. Oh, did I say that out loud? I'm showing video of me flying my drone around Houston right there, and I'm up there with the, the state security camera looking at it and stuff. I know the potential of drones. I've flown them in some pretty tight spaces. They're not hard. Any Gen X kid that grew up playing any of the video game systems, Nintendo all the way up to, PlayStation and Xbox or whatever, knows how to fly a drone right away, immediately. And all the kids growing up, guess what? They do too. They're learning it even faster than we did. It's almost like that singularity that I always talk about, where biology and technology is so close that you're not going to see it transition. It'll just be that way one day.
Go. Well, I was just going to say, modern problems require modern solutions, and I always think about this. There's a thing where I guess teens over in the UK run around, and they're really big on like the 15-minute cities and stuff over there. So teens in the UK get a silly string. I remember playing with that when I was like 10 or so, and they just run up and they just start hitting all the cameras with that. And I just, you love to see it, because you don't always need like this big high-tech solution. You just run up to a camera, a robot dog or something, hit with a little bit of silly string, run away. Doesn't need to be crazy.
Yeah, because you were talking earlier about automation too. I've seen some of those videos with a backhoe operator. They got like 8 drones around them that are stationary. They don't require that much energy to be stationary. And they got 8 different camera views. And it's somebody sitting in a room 500 miles away operating a robotic backhoe on a job site. And, they got the ultimate view of everything that could possibly, both sides, behind everything. We'll talk more about this when we come back. See you in a couple of minutes. David DuByne, Ryan here, our guest at Ransom Godwin.
This is the story of the worst road trip ever. In April of 1846, a man named James Fraser Reed, an Illinois businessman, eager to build a greater fortune in the rich land of California, leads 9 covered wagons out of Springfield, Illinois, on the 2,500-mile journey to California, in what would become one of the greatest tragedies in the history of westward migration. Reed found others seeking to find fortune, adventure, and new beginnings on this perilous trek across the West. Among them was the Donner family. Others like the Graves, Breens, Murphys, Eddies, McCutcheons, Kesebergs, and the Wolfingers would come too. The successful Reed was determined his family would not suffer on the long journey, as his wagon was an extravagant 2-story with a built-in iron stove, spring-cushioned seats, and bunks for sleeping, and 2 hired servants to help with the workload. Reed's 12-year-old Virginia dubbed it the Pioneer Palace Car. Also in the group were the families of George and Jacob Donner. George Donner was a successful 62-year-old farmer who had migrated 5 times before settling in Springfield, Illinois, along with his brother Jacob. Obviously adventurous, the brothers decided to make one last trip to California. At the bottom of Jacob Donner's saddlebag was a copy of Lansford Hastings's Emigrant's Guide, with its tantalizing talk of a faster route to the Garden of the Earth. It's tough, but the going's good. Tamsin Donner writes in her journal, I could never have believed we could have traveled so far with so little difficulty. Indeed, if we do not experience anything worse, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started, but as leader of the wagon train, Tamsin's husband George Donner is aware there's one final obstacle to their journey, the Sierra Nevada, with peaks up to 14,000 feet. It's known if you fail to clear the mountain passes before the first snow falls, the repercussions and results can be both horrifying and deadly. As the Donner party approaches Utah, George Donner makes a pivotal flaw in his decision to splinter off from the main party. Hastings Cutoff says it's a fine level road with plenty of water and grass, saving 400 miles. As it turns out, Donner's information is wrong. In fact, the so-called shortcut adds at least 100 miles to the journey. High in the Sierra Nevada, the Donner party enters the Truckee Pass. They're only 30 miles from the California plains, but supplies are dangerously low, and traveling through the mountains is taking its toll, ending in a broken axle. The Donner party stops to make repairs, but that night, 5 feet of snow falls. Soon the drifts are 60 feet deep. The Donner party will be stranded for 5 months. In just 3 weeks, they've eaten all their food. Then they kill their pack animals. Next, they eat charred bones, twigs, bark, leaves and dirt. Finally, a suggestion was made that were one to die, the rest might live. Cannibalism. On Christmas Day 1846, a Christmas feast like few others takes place. They devour their first human. Bodies are cut up, flesh labeled so people don't eat their own kin. Later, 4 rescue parties bring out some survivors. The very last finds a man named Ludwig alone. Around him, a scene that haunts us today and will continue to leave a lasting mark in history. Ludwig is surrounded by bones and entrails, a 2-gallon kettle filled to the brim with human blood. Also nearby is George Donner's body, his skull split open, his brain removed. Tamsin Donner's body is never found. It also seems a man named William Foster shot 2 Miwok Native American guides named Louis and Salvador for food, which is the only instance of anyone in the Donner-Reed party that was murdered and eaten. The rest of the cannibalized were already dead. They took the survivors to Sutter's Fort, California, by the route that is now known as Donner Pass. Stranded in the early snows of the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly half the travelers died of starvation and illness. Even today, Interstate 80 has to be closed occasionally due to heavy snows and blizzards. Only 45 of the original 81 members of the Donner Party survived. This truly was the worst road trip ever, which reminds us not to be complacent but instead be proactive with our prepping. We don't have to worry about not having food to last. We have My Patriot supply. And right now, you can save $200 on a 3-month food kit with ADAPT 2030. Adapt and stay prepared.
The automated systems for manufacturing for most American automotive lines here in the Southeast U.S. on custom robotics. Like, that's the level that he's at in the custom design space for robotics. So he understands the industry and he sees a lot of synchronicities in terms of like how society can be controlled. And that's the whole thing. It's not about the, the great, freedom that it's going to give us with all this technology. It's more about the control that it is going to put over us. And once in that system, if you do not comply with that system, then that ease of life can be revoked from you. But he sees pretty clearly we're going for like the next 10 years in terms of the automation, the technology, and the specifics in the way that it's going to roll over into, because Ransom, he was going to answer your question for you, and he told me, hey, man, it's probes. When you said in the assembly line of food, like, right now we have USDA, and I know a guy who slaughters cattle, and believe it or not, the USDA inspector, they're not there to actually, like, quote unquote, test the meat like you think it is. They do that in some instances further down the lines in the processing facilities, not the butchers or the facilities that the cattle are harvested. What they're there to do is, the only thing they're there for on time is to make sure that the cattle can walk under their own power onto and into the chute where then they are dispatched. If they are so sick that they cannot walk up onto the chute themselves, then the inspector will say, nope, you can't harvest that one. You can't process that animal. But the USDA inspectors, they come in there 9 a.m. in the morning or whatever time they start processing, 7 a.m. And believe it or not, it's $355 per hour, 1 minute overtime that they need to work. So they're exact on 8 hours a day. And no, I didn't stutter. That's $355 an hour that they get paid for overtime, USDA inspectors. So if a facility is running behind and they need to fill an order and they got, extra, like, all right, it's coming toward Christmas, it's coming toward some kind of, peak time where they need a lot more beef or whatever, steaks, roast, whatever it is, ribs put out there for some sort of holiday. If you need your inspector out there more than 8 hours a day, every single hour they work past that, $355 per hour just for them to watch to see if your cattle can walk up onto the chute or not. And that's all they really do in these facilities when they go from the yard into the chute. And most times it's a headshot. So that's where it sits. And once the meat goes in and it's processed, now you got a choice of If you're an individual person who got that cow from a farmer and then brought it in, and they're using the facility, and then that same butcher does private meat, and they also do commercial meat, both. Once that commercial meat gets ground up, and Revolution Radio, thank you for letting me speak here freely to start the hour out. Because a lot of platforms don't want you to talk about these types of things. Like once they come in and they start to do hamburgers and hot dogs, etc., then that's where Ransom, your question came in. Like how is a human inspector going to inspect that? Well, Ryan was like, they're not. They're just going to put a probe in the meat, just like because we both have homesteads out here. So he and we're always running around looking at the soil pH, looking at the moisture in the soil, because we got all these different testers. So we jam the rods down in the soil, and just like that, you can see what your soil pH is. Because I try to put coffee grains in somewhere to decrease the pH right along my driveway where there's a lot of limestone. So I'm always throwing coffee grounds out there to try to get it to balance, to bring down the pH because it's too high for the grapevines. In other places, I'm trying to throw lime out there to bring the pH up everywhere because it's way too acidic. So I'm always trying to balance my soil in different areas depending on. So I'm always plunging my pH meter down in the soil there. Well, he was saying the same thing. Like when you come into these mass batches of hot dogs or hamburgers, those you won't even need a human. It'll be automation where they're just going to plunge a probe into that, and then they'll be able to get bacteria count, temperature. And then, this brings me on to one thing. So there's a few beef companies out there that are private label beef, and they're going into the freeze-dried arena for beef. They have sent lab samples themselves to be tested from regular store-bought hamburger. And when you have a cow, your own cattle, your own beef brought into a facility, that's one DNA sample from one cow because it's a cow and it's its own DNA, just like your own DNA is yours. But if you mix 2 or 3 DNA, that means 2 or 3 different people. So they was testing the hamburger from store-bought hamburgers. 1,600 DNA samples showed up in store-bought hamburger. Now, if you didn't understand that, that's 1,600 different cow parts from different cows are incorporated in that hamburger. So for me, I'm looking at they're doing multi-ton batches and taking different cuts from the cows through the day and then putting that in at the end of the day and churning it. So these are massive facilities really running, 5,000 cow through, beef through in a day. And they're getting that many where they might burn through that many and then do like an afternoon hamburger run where they're getting that much aftercut from so many cows that they're throwing it into one solid batch to mix it into a certain ratio of the fat and the offcut meat. But from 1,600 different cows, that is insane. That should not be allowed. That should absolutely not be legal to do that. Can you imagine 1,600 different cows to make a hamburger patty or your ground beef? Like, what is in that? What type of possibility of contamination could exist with that many animals coming into a final batch of something? My mind blew, even hearing about that, and it comes from a beef company. That's astounding. Really, for me, I sat there for many minutes after that. And I no, our food supply cannot be that contaminated and that vast that it could contain that many DNA samples from one single 10-pound hamburger bought, raw hamburger bought from a store. It looks all uniform. When you get it, it looks like it all came from one cow and it got ground, from the meat, and just like your grandparents would do it or whatever when they were doing sausage. At least mine did. And then the way it would come out, it was all from the same cow, and it all looked exactly the same. Like they've replicated that. It's from one cow. Like when you buy it, you really think it's from just one cow. But in reality, it's a little bit here, it's a snippet from there, it's a fingernail from there, it's a tendon from there, it's a bit of the hind quarter from there, it's a bit from the back of the neck meat from there. Like all these pieces are going in to make the hamburger. That is just it's gross. I mean, seriously gross. Like you look at things that are it's almost sickening. I can't even think about buying hamburger anymore after knowing what the DNA sampling out of the meat and how many samples of DNA were in this meat. I don't know, man. I'm going to stop rambling here. Ransom, thanks for joining me. Second hour in Revolution Radio. Thank you for letting us have our conversations through your platform. And those of you out there that consider this type of information valuable, consider a donation. Revolution.radio. You can find the donation tab right at the top, right there on the navigation bar. Ransom, take us away. Hour 2.
You know, I have some real insight into that whole topic that you were just talking about because I used to be a butcher. And so when you're talking about your 85% lean hamburger meat, generally that is what's called head meat, and it comes in boxes. I mean, if, they still do it the way they were doing it, it's probably a lot more automated now. But at the time, the boxes would come in frozen cubes, basically, of what's called head meat. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's the trimmings off of the head. And then I would grind that up. I'd grind that frozen stuff up, grind it up about 3 or 4 times to give it that nice pink, marbly look with the fat. And that is your average hamburger meat. So if you're getting it pre grocery store, local grocery store, say, so you're not dealing with the butcher, then that would be happening at some massive warehouse where they're throwing big chunks of the stuff in there and grinding it. And you would probably include like hoof and leg and stuff like that, in not the actual hoof itself, but the meat around the back of it. And, you know, if you're still dealing with a butcher type arrangement and they're using one of the meat companies, they cut up and trim the roast. A lot of it comes pre-cut now. There's like companies that do the cutting and that's all they do. But if you're actually getting the chunks of meat, they'll cut it up, you know, into butt roast, and then you would cut up a rack of ribeyes, and you would saw up some T-bones and all of these other things. But sometimes that stuff gets green and gross looking and not, nice looking for sale. But it's still as fresh as the other meat. So they will trim off the ugly pieces and put it in what's called ground chuck. That's more like 90% or 95% lean. Now, if they're doing that at your store or your butcher or wherever you're getting it, that's good stuff. That's basically ground up good trimmings off of roast and all of the good steaks and things like that. So that would be great. But if you're eating the hamburger meat that, back in the day, then they were selling it for like 88 cents or 99 cents a pound on the 4th of July, speaking of which, and I would have to grind up, hundreds, if not thousands of boxes of this frozen head meat so that people could have hamburglers, for their 4th of July celebration or their Independence Day celebration. And a lot of gross stuff happens just on the grocery store side. It gets dropped in the floor with cleaning solutions and all kinds of different stuff. And that stuff goes out on the counter. So don't let nobody lie to you. That is the way it is, and it's dirty like that. Now, the way they're doing it now, if you say go to Walmart or one of these other stores, they have prepackaged organic steaks and stuff. So that's probably done at a factory where they do all of the cutting and trimming there, and it's already prepackaged. So no telling. But really, if you think about it, that's less people in between you and your food. So like if you're going the more traditional route, it might be a little grosser, but that's the way that butchering was done for a long time. I know I did it. And all of those reduced steaks and roasts that you might see out there, if nobody buys it, it goes in the back and you unwrap it and they throw it in the tray and you grind it up 2 or 3 times and the oxygen makes it red again, and that's what you call ground chuck, or they have other names for it, but it's the leaner of the ground beefs. So yeah, that's gross. And then think about this too. A lot of those meats come with a solution of, I think it's 0.003 of formaldehyde and some gases to keep it red longer. So there's a whole gross thing in that. Really, the best way to get it is if you know somebody that actually raises beef. If you can get it butchered by a butcher that cuts it up right there, packages it, and freezes it right there. That's the only way to go on having clean beef. And we all know that they're adding, let's just say, a new biological factor to a lot of the meats. They've been doing that to pork since 2016. So what you're eating is not even what you think you're eating anyway. And if a lot of people are not even cooking at home. So they go to like Chili's or Outback or, Applebee's and all this, and they eat that. And if they don't go out, they get Grubhub or something to deliver the food to them, that just-in-time system that when it finally gets cut off, if you don't have stuff stacked back, you're up the creek and you don't have a paddle. That's why, anybody should have a paddle, so to speak. And Independence Day is a good day to think about all of those things that you really actually need. And I think if you went back to, let's just go back to the founding of the country and see what a household needed then, I think that's fair to say that you need those same things now. Like all the way up from your self-defense mechanism systems to the farming tools and regular tools to do any kind of mechanic work or whatever you need to do. You need to be your own pioneer, your own founding father for your little legacy there. And that starts with not having to worry about all these disasters that keep happening and are going to continue to happen. So heads up, it looks like Corpus Christi is in the target of this hurricane. And I'm sure they're going to lay on layers of propaganda about global warming and other stuff. And you sent me, some notes to look at, which is, the first time we've ever done that. And I didn't actually get a chance to go through most of it, but I did notice a large trend of extra cool temperatures around the globe. So what do you think about that? Is that going to be the global warming goodness that, has happened this spring and all through the winter, where they continue to, act like things are super rare records when it gets hot here? That was exactly that hot when I grew up here. It's like literally predictable weather where I'm at. Monsoon season and lots of lightning and rain, and we get our little bit of rain at the 4th of July usually right here. But it might be a little different if we get a number, remember they were predicting 33, the magic 33 numbers of named storms this year. And won't this be the first one rolling up in here? And it looks like Corpus Christi is in the bullseye.
Yeah, we'll have to go outside the alphabet, and then we'll do the Greek lettering again, like alpha, beta, gamma thing again, like we did a few years back. But let me touch on a couple points first. We know where our food comes from, because tonight when we were, we had some friends over and we were barbecuing out. They brought side dishes. Some others brought wine. Another person brought their own bread, but see, they baked their own bread and they brought it. The only thing that we really got from the store was the wine and the pretzels. That was it. Everything else came from where we know, because almost all the packaging, I should say all the packaging that we had that we grilled out tonight's all said not for sale on it, because it was from a local butcher, from our own Amish where we took and butchered it. Another friend of ours, he hunts, so he had a butcher do the deer for them, backstrap. Deer meat also is mixed with lard, because, deer meat's so lean. I mean, just almost no fat. So you can either choose to do tallow or lard with it. So they chose to do lard. But all the packaging, nothing for sale. No weights. I mean, yeah, there's a weights on it, but not like what used to come with a commercial label coming out of a supermarket. So almost even the potatoes that were done for the potato salad came from the Amish that had grown the potatoes over there. So everybody here pretty much buys local and they prepare their own stuff. So we knew where the meats came from. We knew where the deer meat the beef came from. Obviously, the potatoes, where that came from. The vegetable for the salad was grown. We had our own different kind of reds and green leaves that we put up for the salad. Somebody else baked the bread that they did themselves. And like I said, the only thing that was taken from a store was the pretzels and the white wine. It was a Pinot Grigio. That was it. Everything else was sourced locally, known where everything came from locally. So when you start to put this in perspective on like how different it is living out here in the countryside, it really, you're going to have to start thinking like this, because we know where our food sources are. And, I pounded in, many a show before, but if you don't know where in an emergency you can find food supplies outside the supermarkets and outside this just-in-time delivery, that should be something that might be a solution that you would want to put into play over the next week, because Independence Day it's almost like New Year. You need to start to think in a different way. It's almost like a resolution. I'm learning independence of thought of old programmed ideas need to break during this day also. Maybe that's what the fireworks are for, is to, bam, you break your old programming independence from the old things that would hold you back or, keep you from achieving your greatness. And this whole just-in-time food delivery thing, I remember during COVID, everybody was like, well, fast food's so cheap. And, people started to rely on that like it was a right-handed crutch for them to go out and get fast food because of all the restrictions during COVID. And again, myself, I was at the bulk food aisles, and I remember that. And I'll tell you a personal story way back. Remember when the whole toilet paper thing was going on, or toilet paper shortage? I was in Costco. So for me, I was like, well, if everybody else is buying toilet paper, nah, I'm not going to buy. I need to be buying like foodstuffs. So the Costco got incredibly busy. Like I'd never seen that busy before. Like 10, 12 people standing in every single line. And every line there was, completely chock-a-block. And all of them had, people checking out at the time. And I remember looking around, and like 90% of the people just had carts stacked full of toilet paper, rolls of toilet paper, rolls of paper towel, anything paper was in their cart. And I'm like the lunatic there with like bulk beans, bulk rice, olive oils, different kind of things I could bake at home, flour, 50-pound bags of sugar, 50-pound bag of flour. And I looked so out of place, rocking up with a bunch of I felt like I was in the 1860s coming back from like a general store somewhere, and all these lunatics are buying toilet paper. But they were looking at me like the lunatic, like, who is this insane dude who's not buying toilet paper? It's really just, and that was that whole time that everything was going around where food delivery, like you say, the Grubhub, the, Hotspot or whatever, I don't even know the company names because I never utilized their service. So forgive me if I don't know any of the names because I just never utilized it and I don't need it. So that is out of my radar of even knowing the names, except like Food Panda or Grubhub. That's as far as my, and Bolt over in Europe when we were in Croatia. I kept seeing a bunch of these Bolt bags go by. Like everybody was ordering at home still, even when we were traveling in Croatia. Bolt was another one. So think about it. Once that stops, and if the supermarkets go into a conundrum of not having enough credit to continue to operate. So I'm going to take you down like a little bit tricky road of economics here, but in a very easy to explain way. Everything runs on credit. Like you use your credit card and you're allowed to buy something, pay for it now, but you need to pay it back in the future, right? And they charge you interest on that. Well, farms operate the exact same way. And supermarkets operate the exact same way. They don't pay for a can of beans when it comes in on the spot. They usually pay like 30 days, 60 days, or in some cases, if they're lucky, 90, but most times it's 30 and 60 days out. If credit dries up, the supermarkets will absolutely go bare. There might be food out there, but unless they can get the credit to secure a chain of like Eagles or Piggly Wiggly or Kroger or whatever it is, on a national level where they're buying at that bulk and then can distribute it to their stores. If their availability for credit is somehow hindered, locked up, or stopped, that means the supermarkets go dry. And the same thing is happening with our farmers. And for those of you out there, you need please understand how this farming system works. They call it an operational loan, where farmers will get a loan in the beginning of the year to go out and get that petrol and get the seeds and get the fertilizer and get the repair equipment if their tractor's broken, or buy a new piece of equipment, new irrigation systems, get that money for the laborers or for the field hands or that sort of thing, farm hands for a better term. If they get devastated in their crops and their crop insurance can't cover their losses completely off of that operational loan, then they lose money to the point if they can't pay it back, then they lose their farms. And the reason I'm telling you that is not about if they could lose their farm, but if there's no credit available due to some sort of economic event, then we would be in a famine within 12 months here. Even in America, we would be in a famine here in America. There would be no way that our farmers could get what they need to plant in the fields. Credit is everything from your supermarket to the actual farms that operate to create the food that then goes to a factory that then gets somehow processed and sent to your supermarket. And you know, as Ransom mentioned, in the cattle industry, and if we go into the hogs and that sort of thing, or even up to the poultry with the chickens and the geese and the ducks and this sort of thing, without credit, that all stops literally on a dime. So you mentioned global cooling spots. And there are so many that have gone on in this last, the week before July, there were snows in Montana, snows in Canada, snow in Afghanistan, snow in Kashmir. And we start to look, snow in the Alps. But none of this really made the news. And you start to ask yourself, why? What's going on with this here? So we're getting this, it seems dovetailing economic woes, higher food prices, and then all these climate events happening. And like I mentioned before, that hotspot in the North Pacific created the conditions for the National Weather Service to issue the most northerly latitude thunderstorm warning ever issued in the history of the National Weather Service last week. They had half-inch hail in the Arctic, at the edge of the Arctic Circle, far north in Alaska, North Slope, thunderstorm warnings and half-inch hail. At the same time, we have this barrel storm going on, which is unprecedented in itself. So either the electromagnetic changes are now here that are in earnest, where you can't hide it anymore, just like the cognitive declines of the leaders, you can't hide it anymore. Or the technology is at such an advanced state that they are juicing the storms to create this outrageous outcome of snows in summer, earliest hurricanes ever, most northerly latitude thunderstorms ever, droughts, floods. I mean, there's so many floods I can't even keep up, to push over the narrative into having us then institute and implement a global tax for climate change. You start to look at this thing and then, all right, this global tax, then where does the farmer sit in this? That's going to be able to grow your food, produce your meats, produce your vegetables. If they're going to have to pay XYZ amount for each crop that they're producing. We're starting to get to the point where I'm really going to say it here in earnest, that I think we are being exterminated slowly to milk the wealth out of whatever form that is of wealth, whatever interplanetary, interdimensional form that takes. That can, your energy can be siphoned. Your low vibrational energy can be a feeding trough for entities interdimensionally. The gold, the silver that can be deposited in central banks can be taken into centralized locations for collection. And the inhabitants of the planet done away with as a fire ant colony that I will pour something on so we don't get stung when we're out in the front field. Of the wasp nest that needs to be eradicated because we've got stung on our back a couple of times. Where do we sit in this? Because there's no longer there's no gray area anymore. Is it happening or isn't it? These things are so outside the normal that everything that is being done right now to humanity is to exterminate it in a slow, methodical way, to extract the most the lowest vibratory energy a human could put out, and extract the physical wealth out of our societies and transfer it to something. But I'm going to leave it there, and I don't know how you can even respond to that, but I know you can because you're good at that.
It kind of seems like a necessity, not just for each individual, but, I've been talking a lot with my son about legacy. All of these elite people have set up these nightmare scenarios of what they picture the future to be like. And now we're starting to see those things unfold. So it's, behoove of the populations of the Western world to start taking their own legacy seriously. And there's no other option to kind of start at the, so to speak, grassroots level. And I don't mean in politics and stuff. I mean with whatever property or resources you have, because if you treat the future as if things are going to happen, as if they've happened in the past, it's kind of hard to argue that there's going to be, upsets in society. I mean, it's bound to happen. And we've been very lucky here, other than natural disasters and a few world wars, a Great Depression and things like that. So our country has had a taste of it, but I don't know if it's enough in the recent recall of the population to deal with it. And we talk a lot about grandparents and old skills that you need to know that they would have passed on. And now we're at that generation where basically the great generation has all died off. The World War II veterans that saw the world ablaze, they're not around anymore. Those are the people that probably, if they got a chance to, let's say, vote in elections, probably wouldn't vote in a new world war or agree with that. But they're not around to kind of tell people the horrors of the way it actually was. So if you didn't learn that, you're probably not going to be learning it. As far as like millennial people and younger than that, there's a lot of smart millennials and actually a lot of, I guess they're calling them Zoomers now, the Generation Z. And they're going to have new skills that older people need, and vice versa. The older people are going to be the last people that actually know how to use tools. I feel bad sometimes. I try to get my son, who's just turned 19, to do like different chores or different tasks. And, I get impatient when I watch them, but then I realize, well, that's, they haven't done that. They haven't needed to do that. And most of this younger generation really hasn't, got forced to get out there and do the hard work under the sun and realize what it's like to be out there hot, dealing with the environment. And I've been kind of thinking of this kind of way of thinking that you kind of have to be a Pleistocene man, and then, more of a revolutionary era person and a technological guru that sees around the corner if you're going to be doing good in the next few decades. Our money's all tied up with different digital systems now, so I know that's going to continue to be confusing for that generational wealth group that you were talking about earlier, that there's still, plenty of boomers and, I guess the edge of of X there that have generational wealth, but that's just slowly disappearing. People are losing the lands that they've inherited for money. They want to move, and then they end up, as I see a lot of middle-class people, where they lease everything. And that is actually the absolute blueprint of the future, where everything, every single thing or option or service that you have will be metered. And, it'll be just like we've talked about this before. In the early 2000s, if you needed some software, you'd just get some software. If you needed image software or audio software or, whatever kind of software you needed, you would get a program. You own that program. That program was on your computer. So even if you didn't have an internet connection or whatever, you had that program on your computer. All of the services now, all the way of the video, the audio, the AI, like there's tons of different applications out there, but all of them are going to the metered system. And they're also using that psychology of like the slot machine, to where you think the more you use it, the better you're going to have an outcome. But all of that's kind of fake. It's not going to grow you a potato outside. You know what I mean? So people have to have their foot in the new world, but also have a firm foot planted in the old one, or they're not going to be able to navigate, because the niches for the human domain are disappearing. And in fact, just like you said, they are killing us off. And all you have to do is look a little bit into food, medicine, and geopolitical situations around the world to realize that that's not, a sci-fi idea of a dystopic future. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's actually happening. Matter of fact, on your channel, you've said some kind of weird stuff, and but you've also kept track of food, right? Prices of food. And over several years, you can see that the number of production, the amount of food that's being produced has year by year had its problems, not enough. And now we're starting to see those years in a row where it's going to be accumulative. And it only takes one world event to put everybody back to where they're dependent on a digital soup kitchen. And, I think they've already had beta programs out there to see what would happen. I remember a few years back, probably about 5 years back, the entire food assistance benefit program glitched out and something happened to it in several states. And people were near rioting just because they couldn't get, today what they wanted from the store. So you imagine if there's just no food in the store and the system of digital soup kitchen is down or has been hacked. Wouldn't that be convenient for the authorities if it wasn't their fault, And as to Ryan, correct? He was talking about, the digital vulnerabilities of companies and how they're worried about being hacked for automation and things. That is the perfect excuse. And actually, there has been a lot of predictive programming in the media and movies about that exact topic, where some kind of rogue hackers or, maybe a state-sponsored hacker turns off major pieces of infrastructure. And that might be, think about this, what we were talking about a minute ago. Say in 10 years, most of the major commercial farms have only AI robots mostly working out there in the field. And then some kind of hack happens. And then they're telling you can't get food because, this event happened, and it just turns it off. It could turn off utilities like water, gas, and them switching to all these green technologies seems like some kind of ploy also to be vulnerable to this idea, because guess what can't be hacked? Gasoline-powered engines. If you have, an old school vehicle, it's got a carburetor, it's got very little electric parts. Matter of fact, you could probably go to AutoZone right now, put together all of the electrical components from any 80s model, 70 model, or early 90s model vehicles and put it in a bucket in a Faraday cage and save a backup copy of all of that stuff, including a battery. So, if you have an old school car, even an EMP from whatever reason wouldn't put you out of service as having a vehicle that you could put together in about 3 or 4 hours. All you have to do is replace the wiring harness and the very few electrical components on those cars. That's some real backup. Now, I understand a lot of people say in the chat, well, you need money to do all these things, but it's not as expensive as you think if you buy copies of the cars that you already have, or buy extra parts for that, because redundancy is a real thing.
It is, and I'll tell you a redundancy story and a personal story. We have a John Deere zero-turn mower, and it's been having problem after problem. It's about 5-year-old now, but it's now starting to have problem after problem. So every time it would break down, in the beginning, I had zero knowledge about anything. So when it it doesn't start, okay. But my neighbor's really good another neighbor of ours is really good at fixing engines. So we'd come over and, we'd spend a couple hours and take things apart. And I literally knew nothing about taking a Briggs & Stratton motor apart, checking out the fuel lines, looking through the fuel filter, coming out to check out the wheelhouse and all these parts of the voltage regulator, and finally got down into the carburetor, and that seemed to be the big problem. So, taking the O-rings on the float bowl and taking the carburetor apart, all these things were so foreign to me. But after doing it so many times, because we had so many problems with our mower, I can literally almost, with some guidance, take that entire motor apart and put it back together myself again. Because at the end of it, speaking of the redundancy part, is I bought 2 new carburetor kits. I bought one because the reviews were, well, it might not fit exactly the 0 point, it might not fit exactly because it's a Briggs & Stratton, it's an aftermarket part. So I bought 2 in case one didn't fit, and then the first one fits, so I'm keeping the second one. And we didn't even have to adjust the valves or anything. But just understanding, because we took the carburetor apart a few times trying to figure out that float bowl, and it was the O-ring in there from all this ethanol in our fuel supply that ate through that O-ring, and then that's why the gas and oil were mixing. And then come to find out, the thing kept flooding, and that the float bowl didn't stop it. So then it's just nonstop problems with the fuel put into our motors to destroy the motor itself, bringing you onto some sort of battery-powered substitute. But to go back into that, the redundancy of it, having two is one and one is none, because I found the same thing with that voltage regulator. When we were repairing that, I went through three, and I had three that I bought. We blew one out testing it. Another one I needed for the bush hog, which actually just happened to fit because it was a Briggs & Stratton motor too, and I'm still left with one extra now. So I got an extra spare of that. I got a whole carburetor repair kit. So I'm starting to find all these extra parts that if something were to happen, I almost have a full rebuild kit for the motor, except for the flywheel, of course. But the electrical system is something different. I repaired the battery a couple times, changed it out. There's been a few problems with the batteries. You're going to have problems with batteries. Don't think you can buy batteries and keep them forever. But one of the things I'm getting at is you're going to have to learn skills that you never thought you would learn before. And I hope it's a hopeful story, because I really knew zero. I mean, zero. Year and a half ago about repairing a motor, or even I would say, a year and a half ago, I knew nothing. Now I can change all the belts. I can, take all the blades off. I can do all this, take the tires off, replace the tires, do all these things, repair the motor, take it apart, put it back together again. And I learned all that. And this is what we're going to have to do is, if there's nobody out there that can repair it, you are either going to have a non-functional piece of equipment, or you're going to have to really learn how to repair your equipment, because having a small homestead out here, things are broken down more than they work. Like weed eaters, the same thing. It's very simple. It's a smaller motor. You're in there, you're out of there so fast compared to like a riding mower. And then a bush hog mower too, like in that flywheel, part of the copper winding was missing. That's why it wasn't firing off. So then to find that new part too and put it in, I mean, once you understand the very basics of how the motors work and how engines work, then you can trace your way back through everything else going out. If it's electrical, I'm still learning about that, but the actual hardware inside the motors, it's a learning curve. And I really everybody out there, you can grow your own food. You can learn how to repair things. You can learn construction. And the reason I'm telling you this, I wanted to come to solutions, because we can talk about problems till we're blue in the face. That's just, there's so many problems today that it's normal, right? But where are the solutions at? So coming into the gardening side of things, this is from True Leaf Market, and it's one of their articles talking about what can you grow in shady areas. Because when you're putting gardens out, you're going to start to look for different, open, full sunlight areas. But what can you grow behind a barn somewhere? What can you grow over in that corner over there behind the house that doesn't get that much light? And everybody's always looking for, got to be full sun right out in front of the pasture in the field or something, Well, what about that back spot that's kind of shady? There's a space for there too that you can grow some amazingly healthy fruits and veg that you know exactly where your food's coming from. So let me read you the list here. Squash, tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers. Melons also, different kind of melons. Now, these are what we consider the full sun type of varieties of things. Anything that's grown underground, like leeks, onions, root vegetables, like sugar beets, that sort of thing, these do well in shade. Now, other areas that like cold weather and also could be in a shade garden would be beans, bees, and herbs, especially, cilantro and these types of things. We never had good luck out in full sun with that. But if you put them behind some shade and shadow, and here's another list for you too: broccoli, cauliflower, and kohlrabi. And the thing we've grown all of these before, except leeks. That's the only thing on the list we have not grown before. But from my own experience, the broccoli and the kohlrabi, you can continuously harvest those leaves as the plants grow, and you can stir fry those. And you can have a vegetable dish just off the leaves growing off the broccoli plant and the kohlrabi plant. But the key is you need to stir fry it. It's very hard, just like kale is. But think about your list there. Again, I'll go through it. Leeks, onions, and any kind of root vegetable. And then beets, too. When they're growing, you can trim those leaves, and then you can make a stir fry out of the beet leaves. Nothing like the peas or the beans. Can't really do that. But, I just wanted to throw these shade-tolerant crops out there that you can throw behind the house somewhere in the shady area. Everything I learned about gardening, I learned from scratch. That's a whole nother thing. Everything I learned about repairing a motor, I learned from scratch. Everything I've ever learned in my life, I've learned from scratch, and everybody has too. I don't care if you have a PhD in something. You started from scratch, literally from knowing nothing about the subject except your interest in it, and then you took the next step and you said, that's interesting, and I want to learn more, and I want to learn more. And that's the whole thing about our evolving world is, like Ransom said, we're going to need to step back into the 1850s again with one foot. But with the other foot, we're going to need to be in modern 2025 with this runaway, AI and technology world that we live in. But you're going to have to sit right squarely back into your fingers in the soil to know where your food comes from, because these worlds need to be divided with a huge, gigantic King Kong wall separating these two worlds, because that integrated world of tech and the food supply, you don't want to be anywhere close to that. You want to have your foot over there where you're growing and you're trading with your neighbors. Like I told you last time, Charlie, one of my neighbors, he's a master at growing broccoli. We grow broccolini, but he grows like full heads. Right now in the summertime, crazy heat, but he's got it in the right location. He waters it at the right times, like 2 hours a day. He's trying to tell me the right times to water and everything. I'm going to call him Broccoli Master. But they don't have any ducks or chickens, so we got eggs. But we don't have broccoli. So I rock down there with a dozen eggs, and he cuts me off a couple of heads of broccoli. I come back with these giant heads of broccoli. And we got extra eggs, and they got extra broccoli. So, it's just about what do you have on your place that you can trade with somebody else. And you might go, well, everybody's got this. No, they don't. Everybody doesn't have red lettuce, purple lettuce, different kind of – think about all the types of lettuce are out there and the different types of beets and sugar beets and, just there's a huge amount of things that people don't have that haven't grown, from the sunflowers to the tobacco to the corn. How many people are growing tobacco on their own farm these days? Not many. Most times it's commercial, but if you're a home grower and you're not using the pesticides on it, man, people want that tobacco. They really do, because they're going to roll it themselves. And if you get it to them right at the time when you're taking the leaves off, they're going to be like, hey, I'll help you come by. And, every week I'll come by and get it and make sure you get me the leaves when they're a little, getting toward the yellowish, and I'll come and cure it at my own house. Thanks for the leaves. And they'll trade you something for that. So, think about through history. I'm just going to, what's it? Smokables and drinkables and edibles. Those are the things that you can always trade in history. So if you can grow tobaccos, people always buy tobacco. If you can distill your own alcohols or whatever, and make your own wine, beer, people are always going to trade for beer and wine, alcohol. If you can grow your own food, it doesn't matter if it's beef or if it's sheep or if it's chicken eggs or if it's veggies. Somebody's always going to trade for the food because they can eat it. Like, go back in history and see what's tradable, and then march that forward into our modern world. But you need to put up a huge wall in front of that, because you're, like I say, tech can't mix with your food. And I don't know, Ransom, I don't know if you agree with that, but we really need to divide these two worlds and know exactly where everything's coming from, because something's going to get slipped in. We're getting like a Mickey Finn, or is that what they called it? Some kind they would put something in your drink back in the day in the 40s, in the World War II. They called it a Finn Mickey or a Mickey Finn, something like that, where they'd drop something in your drink and make you pass out. Yeah. It's going to happen with our food supply, so be careful.
The old school date rape drug. Drop a Mickey in it. No. Yes, I know about that, or heard about it. I don't think that was around in my day there. We didn't have to, because we were already, on the backside of the moral decay of America. So here we are in the future. And, we're talking about these levels of technology. The problem is that the food also is down to the microscopic level being messed with by tech. And a lot of people know what I'm talking about. We can't get too detailed on that, but there's this hydrogel platform you could look into, which is basically the macro and the micro of our food sphere is being tampered with on a technological level. So everything from its coding, so to speak, to how it's being grown and cultivated is being changed. So we have to be the stewards of our own future and grow our own thing. And an idea I've been having is I've been thinking, if people start doing this, there's going to be little pockets of genetic, I guess, bottlenecks of people's seeds and stuff that they're growing, and they'll grow generations of that. A good idea I was thinking is, to meet a lot of other people that also grow some of the same plants you grow and do the seed exchange via the mail. Like if you have some really cool genetic variations of squash or tomatoes or corn or any of that stuff, after a while it starts, kind of looking the same. So you could trade that with someone else. Like a few years ago when I first planted, I got this weird hybrid of a giant yellow squash with the green tips on it, and it was so delicious. And unfortunately, the seeds from that were hybridized once again, and the next thing that came out wasn't very appetizing. So yeah, and that happens. So you got to keep those original seeds, and kind of not hybridize them enough to get or keep the original seeds, and then you're going to have hybridization happen where over time your plants are going to change slightly. So it would be really cool to have a genetic diversity exchange, so to speak, when people are doing good with like I have this desert okra. I've been growing this purple okra, and now it grows, really soft, even with big okras on it. So I only had one plant last year, but the first year I started with a small organic kit that just had like a few, like literally three or four seeds of each plant. And now I have stockpiled probably thousands of seeds just sitting around, waiting to, be popped in the ground at any time. So not only do you need to back up your food, but the ability to produce food in the meantime. Like if things go bad, yes, you'll be comfortable if you have things like stockpiles or storable foods or whatever, but that's just fuel for you to keep going and keep the progress growing, because, that's only a temporary solution, and it's not, as fresh as you really need to be to have great health and success. So you would want to be also stockpiling seeds every year when you grow stuff. A portion of it should just go back to seed collection. And it's so easy to do that, especially with what you were talking about, cilantro. I have like jars and jars of that just started from 2 or 3 seeds. And that stuff grows great. It grows in the desert. It grows great in wet environments. Just sprinkling food out there, even if you're not going to take care of it. You live in Tennessee, and I can imagine that with enough space, you can basically just walk around and eventually you'll figure out all the best spots for each plant. And, it'll just be like a utopic, Garden of Eden. And that's the ideal situation that everybody wants to live in. That's great. We got the Wi-Fi and the Starlink and, nonstop streaming, everything. But that's not going to fill your belly if anything serious happens. The only thing that you'll be able to do is be glued to the, propaganda sources and wait for what happens next. And who wants to do that? I don't want to wait to find out what's going to happen. And that's kind of, I think, what's a good thing about how we always talk about different scenarios that could happen, not necessarily that they will happen, but with all likelihood, with the elite usually doing what they say they're going to do, we are going to experience a World War II type situation, which obviously includes mass starvation for the planet. A lot of people don't really take into consideration the amount of people that starved to death, not just the people that died in straight out warfare. And now that warfare is changing its face into a more technological, monster, there's going to have to be inventions and ways to deal with that. And, we kind of talked about a few. But think about this. Ukraine put into production a few years ago. I remember the stories, probably about 2020. They were going into mass production of cheap parts building drones. And in the U.S., there's enough leisure drones, for entertainment that people have bought. I mean, tons of them. Most people that own a drone have 2 or 3 older models, and the parts, in China obviously can produce large quantities of that too. So what do you think the outcome of the warfare, if it continues upgrading with just technology and not even people, looking eye to eye in the battlefield, but, from far away, remote control, using AI to enhance its ability to track down and trace someone until they become a victim of a small amount of C4 on a little electric fan?
Yeah, and imagine a swarm of those where they just pound in through a wall, one boom, 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 and then 30 others follow as they get into the room. Yikes. But I will address your Tennessee thing. Yes, you can plant some things in the beginning, but if you don't get out onto that field space or the tree line, it's going to be overgrown and swallowed in like a year or 2 maximum. That's the whole thing. Nature's so prolific. I mean, you let it go unattended for a minute and you're behind already. So those trees or those bushes or the fruit trees or whatever need to get a big head start on those field weeds. And once they establish themselves and they can get way above the weeds, then you get what you're talking about. But if you're talking about seasonal crops like the beans and things, they're just going to be in the field weeds in there somewhere, and you'll have to kind of like spot them and dig through the through the biting insects to get in there to retrieve those if they're able to grow above the rest of the taller field weeds in there. We have a patch that's about 300 feet long and about 40 feet wide of blackberries. But to get in there, you might go, wow, there's like so many blackberries, crazy blackberry. Well, we can basically harvest some from the outside, but they're trying to get in there, man. You better have like full on, netting so you don't get ripped to shreds. There's nature's something to contend with. I do appreciate listening tonight. Thank you so much, and happy 4th of July to everybody. DuByne, Ransom Godwin signing off. Please remember to sign up for our show notes. United States Conversation. ProSeedCrops.org.
Thank you for listening to Revolution